The night was heavy with silence, and the battlefield smelled of blood and decay. Ottoman soldiers moved forward with torches in their hands, and the flames shook as if the fire itself was afraid. What they saw in the valley made even the bravest warriors freeze in terror. The land was not filled with trees but with men, thousands of bodies hanging on tall wooden stakes, their faces twisted in their final screams, their flesh torn and their blood dripping to the ground. The cries of the dying had faded, but the horror of their last breath was still carved into their lifeless eyes. The air was thick with death, and even the wind seemed to whisper fear. The soldiers had fought wars across kingdoms, but nothing had prepared them for this one. Of them whispered with trembling lips, "This is the work of Dracula." The name spread like poison through the ranks. They did not call him a prince or a man. To them he was a demon who ruled with shadows and fear. At the edge of this nightmare, Vlad stood, tall, dressed in black armor that glimmered faintly in the torchlight. His eyes were sharp and cold as stone. He spoke no words because he did not need to. The forest of the impaled spoke for him louder than any army. This was not just execution. This was terror carved into flesh. Years before, Vlad had been taken as a boy, held hostage by the Ottomans. There he learned their punishments, their cruelty, and their power. From that prison he carried one truth, that mercy is weakness, and weakness is death. When he returned to Wallachia, he ruled with that truth burned deep into his soul. The nobles who had betrayed his father were the first to face his wrath. He invited them to a great feast, and they arrived in fine clothes expecting wine and music. Instead, Vlad gave them steel and horror. They were stabbed where they sat and dragged outside their bodies, raised on sharp stakes. While their screams filled the air, Vlad lifted his cup and drank. The message was clear: betrayal would always be answered. With agony from that day, his land trembled under his shadow, but it was also safe. Thieves vanished, and fear kept order so strong that a golden cup was said to rest beside the village well for years, untouched by any hand. Everyone knew what fate awaited those who dared. Yet Vlad's greatest hatred was reserved for the Ottomans. When they marched into his land with endless men, he did not face them with numbers. He fought with shadows and fire. He burned villages and poisoned wells, leaving nothing behind but ash and hunger. And when he captured prisoners, he did not kill them swiftly. He turned them into warnings for all to see. The roads became forests of the impaled, stretching for miles, so that every soldier had to march through. Hell itself, that night when the Sultan's men stood before the Valley of Death, their courage shattered. Even Mehmet the Conqueror, who had taken Constantinople, looked upon the horror in disbelief. He admitted quietly that no man had ever made him witness such terror. The army pressed forward, but their souls had already broken. Vlad the Impaler had shown that he was not just a prince of Wallachia, he was something darker, and the world would soon learn his cursed name. Dracula Vlad was born. In the year 1431, in the land of Transylvania, his father was Vlad Dracul, a man sworn to the Order of the Dragon, a secret brotherhood dedicated to defending the faith and the crown. It was from this oath that Vlad received the name Dracula, meaning the son of the dragon, but that name would one day twist into a symbol of fear and darkness. As a young boy, Vlad was taken from his homeland by the Ottomans, forced into captivity with his brother Radu. They lived as hostages in a foreign palace far from the mountains and forests of Wallachia. There he was taught languages, politics, and the art of war, but he was also taught cruelty, the kind that breaks a soul and reshapes it into iron. Every day he saw the punishments of the empire prisoners. Whipped, burned, buried alive. Some had their hands cut off, some had their eyes torn out. He watched children dragged from their mothers. He watched men scream until their voices broke in silence. He learned how fear bends the will of men, more than gold or kindness. The Ottomans wanted obedience, but what they planted in Vlad was something far more dangerous. He learned how power is not given, but taken through terror, through control, through the ability to make men tremble before you. He carried this lesson like a shadow that would never leave his side. Years passed, and when Vlad returned to Wallachia, he was no longer a boy. He was a creature forged in darkness. The land he returned to was broken, filled with treacherous nobles, and divided. Loyalties his father had been killed, betrayed by those who should have stood by him. Vlad remembered their names. He remembered every whisper of betrayal, and he carried vengeance in his heart. His first act as ruler was not to bring peace, but to bring judgment. He invited the boyars, the noble families, to a grand feast. They came laughing and boasting, dressed in velvet, expecting wine and merriment. But as they sat down, Vlad watched them with cold eyes. The doors were sealed. The music fell. Silent and soldiers surrounded them. Without warning, the nobles were struck down, stabbed at the tables, blood spilling across the floor, their cries echoing in the hall. Those who survived were dragged outside and lifted upon sharp wooden stakes, their bodies raised high above the crowd, so that all could see betrayal had been answered with pain so brutal that no man would forget. From that moment his people knew this was not a ruler of mercy. He was a ruler of iron. Yet there was a strange order that followed under Vlad. No thief dared steal from the poor. No soldier dared abandon his post. Even a golden cup left by the town well remained untouched for years, because every man knew the punishment for crime would not be simple death. It would be agony that lasted until the soul broke, but fear alone cannot satisfy the hunger for power. Vlad knew his greatest enemy still sat across the Danube. The Ottomans, who had once chained him as a boy, who now sought to chain his land with armies and swords. They were vast and endless, but Vlad had learned the truth of war. You do not need numbers when you control the hearts of men through terror. And so he began to prepare not only with soldiers but with shadows. Every move, every strike, every punishment became part of a larger plan, a plan to show the world that the son of the dragon had returned, not as a boy, not as a prisoner, but as a ruler who would carve his name into history with blood. The fires of vengeance had been lit, and soon the empire itself would taste the curse of Vlad the Impaler. The throne of Wallachia was not built on gold, it was built on fear. Vlad knew that loyalty bought with promises dies quickly, but loyalty carved into flesh lasts forever, and so his rule became a storm of terror. One story tells of a grand Easter feast. Vlad invited the boyars to celebrate the holy day. They came dressed in silk and laughter filled the hall, but Vlad did not smile. He asked them how many rulers they had betrayed, and how many kings they had buried with their treachery. Their voices stumbled their answers. Weak, Vlad rose and ordered his guards to seize them. Some nobles were slaughtered on the spot. Others were marched for miles in chains, beaten and starved until their bodies collapsed. Those who lived long enough were forced to build his fortress at Poenari stone by stone, until they too fell into the dirt, their corpses impaled as reminders that betrayal would always end in torment. Vlad's cruelty spread like fire through the villages, yet with that cruelty came an iron law. Merchants left their goods on the roadsides. Unguarded peasants walked safely with coins in hand. No thief dared to touch what was not his, because all knew that if caught, Vlad would make an example of them, and their suffering would echo for days. But while his people lived in fearful obedience, the Ottomans moved closer, their armies vast, their banners endless. Vlad understood that no matter how fierce his warriors were, they could not match the empire in numbers, so he sharpened his greatest weapon, the one thing that could defeat an army before a single sword was drawn: fear. He launched night raids. His men dressed in black, striking camps, in silence burning supplies, poisoning wells and leaving corpses behind but not buried, never buried. Vlad lined the roads with impaled soldiers, their bodies twisted in pain. The forest became fields of death. Every traveler, every scout, every soldier saw the same message here. Who rules Vlad the Impaler When spies returned to the Ottoman camp, they spoke of thousands upon thousands raised on stakes, their bodies swaying in the wind, their cries turning into the voice of the land itself. Mehmet the Conqueror listened, and he felt unease, yet he pushed his men forward, but every mile the dread grew heavier. For Vlad, the cruelty was not madness, it was strategy. Every stake was a soldier defeated without a battle. Every scream was a weapon of war. The fields of blood were not only punishment, they were shields made from horror and despair. The people whispered that their prince was no man, but a monster. Some cursed his name, while others prayed to him as protector. But all agreed on one truth: his reign was unlike any other, and his shadow stretched far beyond the borders of Wallachia. The feast of blood was only the beginning, and the rivers of terror would continue to flow until even the greatest empire in the world felt the cold hand of Dracula. The summer night was heavy with smoke, as Vlad and his riders moved like shadows through the forests. They carried no banners, no songs, only silence and fire. When they reached the Ottoman camp, they struck without warning. Tents went up in flames. Horses screamed. Men woke to the sound of blades cutting through flesh. Panic spread faster than the fire itself. The Ottomans had brought tens of thousands of soldiers, yet they faced an enemy they could not see. Vlad was everywhere and nowhere. One moment, his men burned a supply train. The next, they poisoned a well. Then they vanished into the dark, leaving behind only corpses and ashes. Mehmet the Conqueror grew furious, but fury could not stop fear from spreading through his ranks. When the sun rose, the soldiers marched again, but the land itself had turned into a graveyard. Fields were empty villages, abandoned wells poisoned, and by the roads stood forests of impaled prisoners, their eyes wide with frozen terror, their bodies swaying. In the hot wind, the sight broke men long before battle ever came. It is said that one night Vlad himself slipped into the Ottoman camp, disguised in enemy clothes. He moved among the soldiers, sowing confusion, setting fires and striking commanders. Before melting back into the night, the camp was left in chaos, men killing each other in the dark, believing Vlad's army had already surrounded them. For Mehmet, the greatest humiliation came when his vast army finally reached the capital of Targoviste. He expected walls and defenders. Instead, he found silence and a smell that turned the stomach. The city gates opened, and beyond them stretched a sight that made even the conqueror pause. A valley filled with 20,000 corpses, all impaled, stretching. As far as the eye could see, the Sultan stared at the endless field of death. His commanders covered their faces. His soldiers whispered prayers. Mehmet had taken Constantinople, the jewel of the world. Yet even he admitted no man had ever faced such terror before he ordered the army to retreat. For what weapon can defeat an enemy who fights with fear itself? Vlad had turned his small kingdom into a nightmare for the empire. His cruelty was unmatched, his tactics unpredictable, but behind the terror, there was also purpose to defend his land, to make every step for the Ottomans a walk through hell. But with every act of horror, his own people grew restless. Some saw him as protector, others as a cursed tyrant. They whispered that he was no longer man but monster, and that his thirst for blood would one day consume even those he claimed to shield. The reign of Vlad burned like fire across Wallachia, but no fire lasts forever. His enemies grew, many not only the Ottomans, but also his own people. Nobles and rivals who plotted in silence, tired of the endless fear. Even his brother Radu, who had bent to the Ottomans, stood against him. Betrayal came, as it always does, not from foreign swords, but from familiar hands. Vlad was captured in ambush, his power broken by treachery. Some say he was chained in dungeons, others claim he rotted in a foreign cell. Yet the shadow of his cruelty never faded. His name still whispered in villages, and his legend growing darker with each telling years later. He returned once more to claim his throne, but time and blood had weakened him. The enemies he had made circled closer like wolves in the snow. His final battle came. Swift blades clashed in the forests of his homeland, his body pierced by many spears. His head taken as proof of his death, and sent to the Sultan, his skull displayed, to mock the prince who had mocked an empire. But death did not silence him. Instead, it fed the myth. His enemies called him Dracula, the son of the dragon, the impaler. Of men, travelers carried stories of forests filled with bodies, rivers running with blood, and a ruler who drank cruelty like wine. Western writers twisted these tales into something even darker. Soon, Vlad was no longer just a prince or a tyrant. He became the seed of the vampire legend, the monster who would live forever as Dracula. In truth, he was neither hero nor beast. He was both to his people. He gave safety through fear and law. Through terror under his rule, a golden cup could stand, untouched in a public square, yet that same fear crushed their souls. For the world he was the impaler, the man who turned death into a weapon sharper than any sword. His cursed legacy endures not in the ruins of his castles or the stones of his fortresses, but in the fear his name still carries. 5 centuries later, his cruelty has become legend, his shadow walking through history disguised as myth. Some call him protector, some call him monster. All agree he was something far more than mortal. The forest of the impaled is gone. The corpses have turned to dust, yet the vision of it still haunts the memory of mankind. When the name Dracula is spoken, it is not the vampire of stories that truly terrifies. It is the memory of the prince who ruled through. Fear the man who turned horror into power and carved his throne out of blood. This was the dark truth of Vlad the Impaler, history's real Dracula. If you felt the chill of his story, then make sure to like this video, share it with friends who love dark history and mystery, and tell us in the comments what you think of rulers who ruled through fear. Do not forget to subscribe to Dark Truths Archive, because more hidden stories and cursed histories are on the way.